Winter pressed itself over Bremerhof like a weight the town could not shrug off. It was early December 1944, and the sky hung low and metallic, reflecting no light, absorbing all color. It felt, to anyone who cared to look up, like a lid sealing the town from the world. But few bothered. People walked quickly, heads down, carrying on with the rhythm of a war they could neither control nor fully understand. Only one figure moved as though the sky itself mattered, a thin young man pushing his bicycle through the uneven snow. Elias Kruger pedaled with quiet determination, weaving between narrow streets where the snow collected in uneven strips, revealing dark cobblestones beneath. His breath left faint clouds in the air, disappearing almost as quickly as they formed, as if even the cold refused to hold anything for long. The metal frame of his bicycle rattled with each turn, and the small parcels in his satchel bumped softly against each other. He was used to this, the monotony of delivering packages whose senders never remembered his name and whose recipients rarely looked him in the eye. To most, he was simply the boy on the bike, the invisible one. Invisible but not hollow. Inside him lived the weight of absence, the memory of his older brother Ansel, who had been swallowed by the sky months earlier during a bombing raid that lit the horizon in orange fire. Elias had not seen the moment, but he had heard the rumble, felt the tremble in the air, and then seen the smoke that grew like a dark wound. Since that day, he watched the sky obsessively, as if waiting for it to give something back. His brother had taught him small things: how to read shift in the wind, how to listen for patterns in radio noise, how to detect the difference between harmless static and interference caused by distant engines. These lessons had never seemed important, until they were. On this particular afternoon, Bremerhof looked abandoned by color. Windows were fogged from the inside, boots tracked dull streaks of slush across the streets, and stray flakes drifted like ash. Elias stopped in front of the old workshop on Adlergas, a brick building long since emptied, its wooden door swollen by years of damp weather. He had one last delivery to drop off. No one would sign for it, of course. He just placed the envelope inside the doorframe, as he'd been told. But as he stepped back, he noticed something half buried near the threshold: a portable radio. Its casing cracked, one of its knobs missing, its antenna bent like a broken finger. It sputtered weakly, releasing bursts of static that rose and fell. Ordinarily, Elias would have ignored it. Abandoned junk was common in wartime, but something in the rhythm of the noise caught his attention. A stutter, a low oscillation, a pause too deliberate to be random. He crouched beside it, his breath warming the cold metal as he adjusted what was left of the dial. The static shifted, revealing faint threads of sound, clipped syllables, fragments of distance, the whisper of encrypted communication. He had heard something like this before, years earlier, when Ansel had shown him how to play a game they called Catch the Ghost, where they searched for friendly signals hidden in scattered radio interference. The pattern now wasn't friendly. It was jagged, uneven, pulsing like a frantic heartbeat. Then Elias felt it, a cold prickling on his arms despite the layers of wool. This was not random noise. It was the precursor his brother had taught him to recognize. Interference caused by heavy engines moving in formation at high altitude. Bombers. Approaching. For a moment, he stayed motionless, the world narrowing to the broken radio and the icy air around him. The town outside continued with its slow rhythm. Carts rolling, shoes crunching, someone hammering weakly against a frozen shutter. No one else sensed what was coming. No one else saw the sky the way he did. A faint tremor passed through him, not a fear but a certainty. If he did nothing, Bremerhof would be caught unaware. If he acted, he would face officials who never believed him, soldiers who cared more about paperwork than possibility. He knew this. He knew the frustration. He knew the humiliation. But he also knew the truth humming from the broken radio in his hands. The sky was warning him. And this time, he refused to lose another brother, even if the brother in question was a whole town. Elias knew there was no time to hesitate. The pattern in the radio interference was becoming sharper, more frequent. It meant the formation was drawing closer, closing distance with steady inevitability. He tightened his grip on the damaged radio, slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat, and mounted his bicycle. The cold metal frame nearly burned his fingers, but urgency warmed something inside him. He pushed off, tires skidding slightly before catching grip on the uneven snow. Bremerhof blurred around him as he pedaled. The narrow streets tightened like a maze built to slow him down. His breath became ragged as the cold bit his lungs. But he didn't ease up. He knew where he had to go. The regional command post near the town square. A squat concrete structure that served as both administration and lookout. It was a place where warnings were supposed to be taken seriously. But he also knew its reputation. Rigid officers, endless protocols, a layered chain of command that moved slower than winter sunlight. When he arrived, the small courtyard outside the post held a thin crowd of clerks and uniformed men huddled near a coal brazier. Their faces were gray with exhaustion, their postures slumped under the weight of paperwork rather than rifles. Elias pushed through, ignoring the murmurs and annoyed glances. Inside, the air was warmer but cluttered, maps pinned to walls, tables buried under reports, telephones ringing sporadically. He approached the front desk, where a sergeant with round spectacles and an expression carved from suspicion looked up in irritation. "What is it?" the sergeant asked, already sounding tired. Elias swallowed, trying to steady his voice. "Sir, there's incoming aircraft. A formation. High altitude. Possibly enemy. I picked them up on a radio." The sergeant lifted a hand. "Where is your confirmation?" "I don't have an official signal, but I recognize the interference pattern. It's consistent with heavy engines. My brother—" "Your brother is not regulation." The sergeant cut in sharply. "Nor are your guesses." "It's not a guess," Elias insisted, feeling the urgency press against his ribs. "The interference is rhythmic, directional. It's moving closer. If you activate the early warning siren now, the batteries could—" "The batteries will not be reoriented without authorization," the sergeant said, adjusting his spectacles in a way that suggested he had repeated this line many times before. "An authorization requires confirmation from our monitoring station. No such confirmation has been issued." Elias felt the air around him thicken. A wave of frustration tightened his throat. He tried again, leaning forward. "Please, at least send a runner to the station. Or allow me to go. There's no time." A junior officer approached, irritated. "What's this about?" The sergeant waved vaguely at Elias. "Civilian. No credentials. Claims he heard enemy bombers through a broken radio." The officer let out a short, dismissive exhale. "Send him home. We don't stir the whole town because a delivery boy thinks he's hearing ghosts." Elias opened his mouth, but something in their eyes, boredom, tiredness, complacency, told him there was no breaking through. Not here. Not fast enough. The sky was already shifting. He could feel it like pressure behind his ears. He stepped back from the desk, the officers already turning away, their attention pulled back into the ritual of paperwork and routine. As he exited the post, he heard someone mutter, "Kids these days think they're part of a war just because they own a radio." Outside, the cold hit him harder this time, as if punishing him for wasting precious minutes. He gripped the handlebars of his bike until his knuckles stung. The doubt crept in quickly, whispering that maybe he had been wrong, that maybe the static had fooled him, that maybe he was trying too hard to see what his brother once saw. But the whisper didn't last long, because the sky had changed. It was subtle at first, a faint tremor in the air, a distant vibration too low for most to notice. But Elias felt it instantly, the way a wounded nerve reacts before the mind can even process the pain. The broken radio in his coat crackled in response, sending a sharp pulse of interference that echoed like a warning shot. He looked eastward. The horizon was a darker shade of gray, moving unnaturally, as though shadows were sliding beneath the clouds. The formation was close, closer than anyone in the command post realized. He mounted his bicycle again, this time with no hesitation, no lingering doubt. If the officers would not act, he would find someone who could, someone who might listen, someone who might remember his brother, and the codes they invented together. There was only one place left, the old anti-air battery station near the northern ridge. Understaffed, under-equipped, nearly forgotten, except for the lone operator who worked there Ansel's friend. The last person who might believe a warning born from broken machinery and a memory still echoing in Elias's heart. So Elias pedaled, harder than before, as the sky above him began to hum with the sound of engines still too faint for most ears, but not his. Not anymore. The path to the northern ridge wound through the quieter sections of Bremerhof, where houses grew smaller, windows darker, and the smell of the sea mingled with the metallic bite of cold air. Elias pushed his bicycle through patches of uneven snow, his legs burning from effort and fear. The further he rode, the more he felt the tremor in the air thickening, a low, distant vibration that pulsed through the sky like a second heartbeat. The bombers were closing in. He cut through a lumber yard, now half abandoned for winter, stacks of frozen timber forming narrow corridors. Beyond it lay an old storage district used during the early years of the war, before resources had thinned. Now it was little more than a graveyard of rusted machinery. Elias dismounted, guiding his bicycle across the icy ground. The broken radio in his coat crackled again, this time with sharper bursts of interference, irregular pulses like static breath. Each burst echoed the rhythmic engine rotations of aircraft high above the clouds. The thought of how close they already were sent a shiver across Elias's spine. If the command post refused to act, the town would rely on a single man at the anti-air station. Someone who hadn't seen real action in months. Someone who probably didn't expect trouble on such a dull, gray afternoon. But at least this man might listen. Elias pushed forward, the path narrowing as he approached a fenced-off section with faded warning signs. Beyond the fence lay one of the old mines. The ground here was unstable, remnants of wartime desperation. Elias knew better than to cross it directly, but he also knew he didn't have the luxury of long detours. He scanned the area, forced to improvise. The safest route was a thin path hugging a long concrete wall, barely wide enough for a bicycle. He lifted the bike, hugging it to his chest, boots slipping as he crossed. When he reached solid ground again, he lowered the bicycle gently, panting. Adrenaline pushed him back onto the saddle, and he pedaled the last stretch until the land began to slope upward. The anti-air station appeared at the top of the ridge, a low, reinforced bunker with a lookout tower beside it, one lone sentinel against an entire sky. As he reached the base of the tower, he saw the operator standing just inside the entrance. Franz Adler, a man in his early 30s, with tired eyes that still held sharpness beneath the fatigue. He wore a worn uniform and a heavy coat with patches sewn on unevenly. Elias had seen him before, back when Ansel was alive. Franz had always spoken about Elias's brother with warmth, and the two had shared a few jokes over cracked radios and late-night static. Franz stepped out into the cold, squinting. "Elias, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be on this side of the ridge." Franz, "There's incoming aircraft," Elias said, voice trembling from both cold and urgency. "High altitude. A formation. I picked them up on a broken radio. It's interference, but it's real. You have to activate the sirens." Franz frowned, not dismissively, thoughtfully. "A broken radio? I know how it sounds," Elias said quickly, "but my brother taught me how to read this kind of interference. The pulse pattern. It's heavy engines in formation, and it's closing fast." Franz studied him for a long, quiet moment. The wind cut between them, carrying the faintest vibration. One Franz didn't seem to register. Elias felt another pulse from the radio pressed against his chest. Sharp, near, urgent. "Command didn't send anything," Franz said finally. "Are you sure?" Elias met his gaze. As sure as Ansel used to be. Franz's jaw tightened. Something flickered across his expression. Memory, grief, trust. He stepped closer. "Show me the radio." Elias pulled it out. The casing was cracked, the antenna barely functioning, but as Franz held it, the device sputtered again, spitting out another burst of interference. Franz froze. The sound was faint, chaotic, but not random. "That's directional," Franz murmured. "You weren't imagining it." Another pulse hit, louder, longer, sharper. Franz's head snapped toward the eastern sky. Elias didn't need to say anything. They both heard it now. The low vibration, the distant churn of engines hidden behind thick clouds. Inside, Franz ordered. They rushed into the bunker. The interior was cold, lit by a few flickering bulbs. Franz moved quickly, flipping switches, checking bearings on outdated equipment. Everything inside seemed too old, too fragile for what was supposed to stop. He picked up a headset, adjusting dials and knobs. Still no signal from command. Franz muttered, "If I activate the sirens without authorization, there won't be a city left to worry about protocol," Elias said, stepping beside him. Franz hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "Get ready." But the equipment sputtered, old circuits struggling to respond. The communication line buzzed weakly, barely transmitting. Franz swore under his breath, "Damn it, we need a stronger trigger." Elias's heartbeat hammered as he looked at the broken radio in his hands. An idea struck, reckless, improvised, impossible, but possible enough. "We can use this," Elias said, lifting the radio. "If I rotate the dial just right, it causes interference on the internal lines. Ansel and I use that trick to send each other fake signals. If I hit the right frequency, it will trigger a pulse strong enough for the siren line. Pick it up." Franz stared at him as if weighing the idea against the sky itself. "How long will it work?" Franz asked. "A few seconds," Elias admitted. "Maybe less." Franz nodded once. "Do it." Elias took a deep breath, positioned the radio near the comms panel, and began turning the dial with controlled precision. The radio screamed, sputtered, then emitted a jagged burst of distortion that collided with the bunker's communication line. Franz watched the indicator. It flickered, then it glowed, and the first warning siren of Bremerhof began to rise. The siren's wail rose to the bunker, like a creature awakening after years of sleep. It shuddered against the concrete walls, climbed the tower, and exploded across Bremerhof in a long, desperate howl. For a heartbeat, nothing happened outside. The town frozen in confusion, doors cracking open, people staring upward with no idea what they were about to face. Then the sky answered. A deep, rolling vibration pressed through the clouds, heavier and clearer than before. Franz dropped the headset and ran for the lookout slit. Elias followed, breath sharp in his chest. They reached the narrow opening, and the world shifted. The clouds tore open. Dark silhouettes emerged first, huge and unmistakable, moving with the steady, merciless rhythm of machines built for destruction. A formation of bombers, more than Elias expected. Too many. Their engines churned together, vibrating the air in a way that rattled bones. They were coming directly toward the ridge. Franz exhaled, barely a whisper. "God help us." Below, the siren finally sank into the town's consciousness. People scattered, running for basements, grabbing children, slamming shutters. Soldiers rushed from barracks, shouting, but chaos swallowed their orders. The early warning bought only seconds stolen by a broken radio and a memory. Franz snapped into motion. "Elias, to the targeting controls." Elias obeyed without a word. The anti-air battery was old, its metal chilled and stiff, its gears requiring force to shift. He grabbed the cold handles and helped Franz angle the barrels upward. The machinery groaned, reluctant to move fast enough. The bombers banked, descending into attack formation. Elias saw the gleam of their undercarriages, the faint, deadly silhouettes of bay doors. A cold realization hit him. They were minutes from striking. Maybe less. Franz slammed the lever. Come on, ignite." The generator coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The battery hummed. The entire bunker vibrated as the first round loaded. Franz positioned himself at the firing controls while Elias stabilized the alignment, watching the bombers grow larger in the narrow targeting window. Franz muttered, "If command had warned us, if they had given us 20 more seconds." "But they didn't," Elias said, tightening his grip. "So it has to be now." Another vibration reached them, heavier, sharper. The bombers were accelerating. Franz steadied his breath. Hold. The targeting reticle floated, shaking as the ancient gears struggled to maintain precision. Elias kept adjusting micro-movements, fighting the mechanical lag. Sweat rose on his forehead despite the cold. His heart pounded in time with the engines overhead. Then Franz shouted, Fire! The bunker erupted. The battery kicked back with violent recoil, metal shaking as a shell tore upward, slicing through the gray sky. Elias tracked the shot's trajectory, a bright arc disappearing into clouds. A moment passed. Then a distant explosion crackled like rolling thunder. One bomber jolted out of formation, wing dipped, leaking smoke. It faltered, spun slightly, then dropped out of view behind a cloud cover. Elias felt a burst of hope, but it died quickly as the remaining bombers adjusted, tightening formation, accelerating into their attack run. The sky darkened with their shadows. Franz reloaded. Again! They fired a second shell. This one missed, bursting too far behind the formation. Franz cursed, adjusting bearings. Elias worked the alignment handles, his arms aching. The machinery groaned louder, metal straining. Below them, Bremerhof braced. Tiny figures sprinted through the streets. A mother dragged two children toward a cellar. A man pulled a wounded neighbor inside a doorway. Church bells clanged urgently, blending with a fading siren. The bombers began their descent. Elias knew this angle. He had watched Ansel sketch diagrams of bombing runs, explaining altitude shifts and timing. This was the moment where any defense mattered most. 1 second too early or too late, and the whole town was gone. Another burst of interference crackled inside Elias's coat, the broken radio fighting to stay alive, as if echoing the sky's panic. He reached into the pocket instinctively, fingers brushing the device. And then he understood something Ansel once said during their game of Catch the Ghost. If you know where the interference peaks, you know what machines truly are. Elias's eyes widened. He adjusted the battery's alignment. Abruptly, sharply, 2 degrees left. Franz recoiled. Elias, that's... Trust me. A beat of stunned hesitation. Then Franz locked the angle. Fire! The battery roared again. The shell streaked upward, straight into the cloud bank where Elias had sensed the strongest interference. A flash erupted behind the gray veil. A bomber burst out of clouds, spinning violently, one wing torn, flames trailing behind it like a burning comet. It hurtled downward, away from Bremerhof, disappearing behind a distant forest ridge. Franz stared at Elias, not with disbelief, but with something close to awe. But there was no time. 3 bombers remained, still descending, still aligned. Franz reloaded. This is the last shell in fast rotation. After that, the reload will be too slow to stop the first drop. Elias steadied himself, gripping the alignment handles. Above them, the bomb bay doors opened. The town's fate hung between seconds. The bomb bay doors yawned open like dark jaws against the pale sky. Elias felt their shadows settle over him, heavy and cold. Franz slammed the final shell into place, every movement sharp with urgency. This one has to count, Franz muttered, voice tight. After this, we won't reload fast enough. Elias adjusted the alignment handles, his arms trembling from fatigue. The broken radio in his coat crackled again, long, strained pulses, sputtering like a dying heartbeat. But there was meaning in the distortion, a rhythm beneath the noise. Elias closed his eyes for half a second, remembering how Ansel had taught him to feel rather than hear the change in signal intensity. He opened his eyes. I have it, he whispered. Franz didn't question him. Not anymore. The bombers shifted formation. 3 remained, diving in a V-shape, preparing to release their payload in perfect timing. The targeting reticle wavered in the narrow sight window as the battery strained to track them. Too old, too slow, gears grinding under the pressure, being asked to do more than they were built for. Elias breathed in deeply, steadying the handles. Franz, 3 degrees down, now 2 left, hold it. The sky vibrated like a taut wire. Fire! Franz roared. The battery detonated with force, shaking the bunker and echoing across the ridge. The shell rocketed upward, carving a bright streak through the clouds. Elias held his breath. The shell struck the lead bomber dead center. For an instant, it looked as if the aircraft were simply swallowed by light. Then it split apart, metal shredding, fire bursting outward. The blast destabilized the formation. The bomber on the right veered sharply to avoid debris, clipping the trailing aircraft. Panic rippled through the formation, engines screaming as pilots fought for control. The bombs meant for the town fell early, releasing confusion. Elias watched as the dark shapes plummeted not toward Bremerhof, but toward the frozen outskirts beyond the ridge. A series of distant explosions rolled across the open fields, sending flashes across the snow. The shock waves trembled beneath his boots. The remaining bomber attempted to pull up, but it was too low, too damaged, too panicked. It banked sharply, lost altitude, and vanished behind a row of pine trees with a thundering crash. Then silence. It settled slowly, like snow drifting after a storm. For several seconds, Elias felt nothing but the pounding of his heart and the burn in his lungs. He realized only then that his hands were still gripping the targeting handles, so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Franz finally exhaled, staggering back from the firing controls. "Elias, you did it." But Elias shook his head. "We did it." Outside, the siren continued its dying echo, its final tones bending into silence. The clouds above began to settle, slowly closing the wounds the bombers had carved into them. The metallic sky softened into a pale gray. Bremerhof was still standing. Franz placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, heavy, grounding. "Your brother, he'd be proud of you." Elias lowered his head. A strange calm washed over him. Not relief exactly, but something deeper. The weight of fear loosening, the ache of loss easing just enough to breathe again. He reached into his coat and pulled out the broken radio. Its casing was cracked, bits of wire exposed, its antenna bent beyond repair. The device sputtered once more, a faint, final flicker of static. Franz chuckled softly. "Looks like it gave everything it had." Elias nodded. "Just like Ansel used to." They stepped outside the bunker. From the ridge, the town looked quiet, confused, alive. People emerged from shelters, blinking at the sky, whispering to each other. Some pointed toward the northern ridge, wondering how the siren had sounded so early, how the anti-air battery had been ready before the attack even began. Word would spread by nightfall about a strange early warning. A ghost signal that confused the bombers, a miracle that saved Bremerhof. Some would say it came from an Allied spy, others from a malfunctioning tower. No one would think of a young delivery boy with a broken radio, and Elias preferred it that way. He and Franz walked down the ridge together. The snow crunched beneath their boots. Franz turned to him one last time. "You should come work at the station. You have a gift." Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe someday." He mounted his bicycle, the metal frame still cold under his fingers. The satchel at his side was nearly empty now, only scraps of routine deliveries remaining. But his pocket felt heavier, the broken radio resting there like a piece of memory, a piece of his brother, a piece of the sky he refused to ignore. As he pedaled back into town, people glanced his way. No one knew what he had done. No one knew that the siren, the timing, the miracle had come from a boy who watched the sky because he couldn't bear to lose anything to it again. He slipped through the streets quietly, as he always had. The invisible boy, the one no one noticed. And yet the city stood behind him, intact, warmed by lights returning through windows, by families reuniting in doorways, by relief woven into their breath. The sky above was still gray, but it no longer felt like a lid. It felt open, vast, alive. Elias rode on, snow swirling gently around him, the broken radio resting in his coat like a stubborn heartbeat. The legend of the ghost signal would spread, whispered in bars and workshops, retold for decades, a story of an unseen warning that arrived just in time. And though no one would know the truth, Elias carried it silently, turning one last time to look at the ridge where fire had met courage. Sometimes, he thought, the bravest thing is simply refusing to let the sky fall again.